Thank you very much, Mary. Well, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Pro Bono I chair, I'm really pleased to welcome you all to the official launch event for Pro Bono Week 2020. We've got a fantastic panel to inform and debate pro bono across the 4 nations. And in a moment, I'm delighted to pass on to our chair for tonight, Catherine Baksi. You probably all know her. She was previously a barrister and is now an award-winning legal journalist. She writes for The Times, for The Brief, The Guardian, and other journals, including, I think, Counsel magazine. You've probably also seen her commentating on Sky News, and I think she also reports for Thomson Reuters. So with that, can I pass on to Catherine? And with thanks to everyone in the audience, we look forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Hello, good evening, everybody. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here for this launch event of the National Pro Bono Week 2020. Obviously, we've had unusual times, to say the least, which have probably been difficult for everybody, including the pro bono and advice sectors, in delivering free legal help to those who need it. Unlike with the Six Nations rugby that's belatedly finished, this evening isn't a competition, but we do have representatives of all 4 nations of the United Kingdom to talk about the experiences and difficulties of delivering pro bono help during the pandemic, and to collaborate, and importantly, to look to the future to share innovative ways to deliver free legal help to those. So if I can start by introducing our panel, actually of 5, because we have a 2-header for England. I'm not sure if that's quite fair, but there it is. So representing England in the white corner, we have Ed Archer and Jasmine Ashley-Tagoe. Ed is the service design lead at Toynbee Hall, and Jasmine is the manager of the Free Legal Advice Centre there. FLAC run online clinics. They've been running online clinics this year with the support of pro bono partners, and they also offer online triage, I'm told. For Scotland, we have Mungo Bovey QC, who is the keeper of the library of the Faculty of Advocates. That rather splendid title, I'm told. The library is where barristers in Scotland hang out. They've been hot desking there, Mungo tells me, since the 18th century, and he's in charge of the library there and keeps order. He's also in charge, I think, of the Faculty of Advocates Free Legal Advice Services Unit. Next up, very pleased to say, representing Northern Ireland, we have Lord Ben Stevens, the new boy on the Supreme Court. He's the Northern Irish judge there who replaced Lord Carr, who retired, and I think he's been there for just about a month. So he's getting into the swing of things there. Last but not least, we have Nathan Vidini representing Wales. He is the founder and director of Ultra Law. I think I've said that right, apologies if I haven't. The UK's first not-for-profit law firm, which launched just this year in March, and controversially perhaps for some, has set all of its employees annual pro bono targets. So without further ado, I'm going to invite each one of them to just give a short sort of synopsis of what it's been like in their corner of the kingdom for the last 6 months during the pandemic. So if we can start off with Toynbee Hall, Ed and Jasmine.
Hey, and just to reassure you that we are sharing our 4 minutes, so there is equal allocation between the nations. Hi, so I'm Ed, I'm from Toynbee Hall. We've delivered free legal advice for the last 120 years. Me and Jasmine are going to talk about pro bono advice in England, me about why we need it, and her about how it works. So we've all seen how this pandemic has increased inequality. While with some exception we all have the same rights, we don't have the same roads to making them a reality in our lives. At the front line, we see daily the difference that access to justice makes. Increasingly, we are seeing institutions and individuals with power taking a gamble that the people we support don't know their rights or can't defend them. And pro bono advice is the only thing that prevents that gamble from paying off. Without free legal advice, You can be evicted in the middle of a pandemic because your landlord considers you a lodger. Or you can be put on furlough and still expected to work, or work somewhere unsafe, or both. And the issues people normally come to us with haven't changed. So it's just that people are now facing them with less money, less certainty about what the future holds, and more stress. In our organisation alone, during the crisis, hundreds of people who'd lost faith in being treated fairly have now got a suitable home or compensation or access to their child or freedom from violence, all thanks to a well-worded letter or judicious phone call. The people we work with can't afford to pay for legal advice, but thanks to lawyers giving up their time without payment, their rights are protected, which is why, as we go through this crisis, pro bono advice could not be more vital.
Thank you. The pandemic has created a raft of legal issues which have impacted people's lives severely. There has been a surge in particular areas of the law requiring demands. This includes immigration, family, welfare rights, and also housing. We've also seen a lot of demand for employment law. This is further complicated by challenges brought about by digital exclusion and isolation. However, it's been very encouraging to see how our colleagues within the nation have risen to this challenge by adopting new and innovative service delivery models. Many of them have done this within a very short period of time and under tremendous pressure. Some of them have resorted to safer face-to-face advice, and many of us have resorted to remote advice. In our case, our pre-existing remote advice system has allowed us to see over 600 matters since the lockdown. This has been a lifeline for us, and I know it has been for many of our colleagues within the nation. We have learned that when remote advice is suitable, it does allow us to flexibly increase access to justice and also determine different ways for the services to be accessed as well as delivered. Another thing we have noticed is that remote advice should usually work alongside complementary systems. It can't exist in isolation. And we found that utilizing online tools, such as the online triage in our case, has been very useful. This allows us at a very early stage during the client's journey to determine whether we are indeed the right organization for a client, and if not, to collaborate with other organizations, whether they be advice agencies or other support services, to assist our clients appropriately. All in all, it has been a tremendous effort, with LawWorks at the forefront of this fight. They've done a tremendous job in bringing us all together to brainstorm different ways to navigate through what is now the new normal. So I just wanted to say thank you to them. And thank you to all the volunteers that give up their time to help. It makes a huge difference on the ground. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mungo, if we can go to you for Scotland, please.
Hello, and from Edinburgh. I'm the convener of the Free Legal Services Unit of the Faculty of Advocates, which is a referral bar of only 430 people. We work through agencies so that rather than requiring a solicitor to instruct us for tribunals, we can take work for the pro bono unit from our partner agencies such as the Citizens Advice Bureau. Now, with the numbers being small, we used to have a list of volunteer advocates, but that seemed unnecessary, and so we simply now, when we have a case, we email through the Secretariat weekly email that goes to all practicing advocates. And so I have, by that method, recruited everyone at the Scottish Bar to my pro bono unit. In relation to the pandemic, as litigators, we are mostly reactive, and through most of the pandemic, there have mostly been no courts and mostly been no evictions. So there hasn't been a great deal to report. But there are two areas in which I and my colleagues have been involved. There's a housing lawyers cooperation happening in Glasgow in relation to dispersed asylum claimants. And you will have seen that some people were moved from flats into hotels at the beginning of the lockdown, and that led to stress, mental illness, and indeed to untimely death. And that kind of issue has been exercising us during the lockdown. Similarly, my colleague Mark Lazarovich is chairman of the Citizens' Rights Project, which advises European Union citizens on their position as Brexit comes in, and on the EU settlement scheme. So we have been busy during lockdown, and it has been interesting, and I'm sure we'll come to the significance of the technological changes that have come to the fore during lockdown, not least changes that have permitted me not only to play an active part in organising the Pro Bono Week under Toby's chairmanship from London, but also to take part along with others in a remote conference such as this, which simply wouldn't have happened like this before our pandemic experience. So there has been progress, and something good has come from a situation which otherwise has little to commend it.
Thank you. Lord Stevens for Northern Ireland.
Well, thank you very much. The new kid on the block. So I am unashamedly going to promote pro bono work and also reference perhaps one of the tools that we use in Northern Ireland to deal with issues that might arise during the course of the pandemic. But before doing that, I would like to say that on Wednesday we have an interesting case in the Privy Council dealing with the issue as to whether or not remote hearings are constitutional under the constitution of the Turk and Caicos Islands. So if you're feeling interested in that, tune in to the UK Supreme Court or the Privy Council website on Wednesday. But my starting point is there has to be access to justice and equality before the law. So pro bono has a vital role to play. It relies on altruistic people volunteering their time and legal expertise to assist. The people who do that value society by providing legal assistance. My view is that pro bono work is additional to, not in substitution for, remunerated legal work. It can never replace a properly funded, independent legal profession. And also, I would emphasize, this is not just work undertaken at the start of a legal career. It is a feature of the presentation of some cases in the Supreme Court and in the Privy Council. So to my mind, it's a win-win for all. For young barristers and solicitors, they're able to gain experience. For more experienced professionals, they are provided with an opportunity to be involved in the most complex litigation. And for judges, we have cases presented in an intelligible way. And above all, for litigants, they are able to present their cases to a court. So turning to the Northern Irish experience, there have been some innovative and forward-looking developments. The Human Rights Commission in Northern Ireland joined up with the Ulster University to carry out research into litigants in person. And as a result of that research, they have now set up a reference group chaired by Mr. Justice McAlinden. That group consists of representatives of the Bar, the Law Society, the Human Rights Commission, the Ulster University, interested other groups. But a particular feature is that exactly half of the people on that reference group are litigants in person. So they bring their own knowledge to that group. And so it is just such a technique or ability that will be able to address problems that are thrown up during the course of the pandemic. To my mind, the most significant is that we are rapidly moving to remote hearings. The world is interconnected in a way that it was not previously. And the question that has been raised is whether those people who cannot gain access to remote facilities are thereby excluded. And so I consider that pro bono has to adapt to that changing scenario. So I'd be very interested in seeing how that can be achieved in the course of the discussions that take place. So thank you very much indeed.
Great, thank you ever so much. Last but my name is Nathan for Wales.
Thank you very much. I'm here to provide a slightly different perspective to my friends on the panel, not just coming from Wales, but I'm also in the private sector, not in different volunteer clinic or in the judiciary for my sins. I worked in different advice clinics, but I'm here because I set up my own law firm, one that very stupidly was in the middle of the pandemic. And it's the UK's first not-for-profit law firm in the UK. So that means that we put purpose over profit, and we include initiatives such as pro bono targets for our fee earners and our employees. So for non-lawyers in the firm, they can provide their assistance to a charity shop or an old people's home or whatever they want to do that meets their particular passion. So I'm not going to talk about that tonight, obviously, because we're pro bono here talking about lawyers, but it's very interesting that Lord Stevens already spoke about altruism. That's where the name Ultra Law has come from. And for me, that's the very heart of what we do in Ultra Law. It's about meeting the needs of our clients. Now, our clients are those who need pro bono assistance, but also those who are paid clients as well. I myself had stopped counting my pro bono hours this year, but my consultants and my employees have a minimum of 200 hours per year. We have no fee earning target financial at all. So again, that liberates our lawyers to work in accordance with their passions and help the people that they want to help. In terms of the pandemic, unfortunately, it's the same story as it has been, as we've just heard from my friends across the UK. There's been a dramatic increase for employment law advisor, which is my particular specialism. My wife works for a charity called Shelter Cymru, a massive increase in housing law advice that's been needed. And more recently, I'm told, a lot more debt advice in Wales. Overall, it's a very sorry picture. And it mirrors what, as I said, my friends have said. The Lord Stevens already has included something I was going to talk about, and that's digital inclusion, as we're including it. That's for people who, such as street homeless, a massive group of them in Merthyr here in Wales, who aren't able to access the new ways of achieving legal advice through their devices. They're trying to use devices like they haven't before, like downloading documents, electronically signing legal aid forms, trying to email attachments. Just simply being able to attend appointments by telephone has been a struggle for a lot of these people. And what we're finding in Wales, that the most vulnerable are the ones that have fallen by the wayside and the ones that are being in need of help the most. When you throw in mental health illness, which is becoming a pandemic in the UK, I think you can see it's a big picture. Our court services are overwhelmed, at least in the employment tribunal, because of a backlog of claims. And unfortunately, being very bleak from deepest, darkest Wales, I can't see that improving. Government is asking the third sector to step in, and frankly, we're being overwhelmed.
Yeah. Thank you all very much. And thank you for sticking to time so beautifully too. That's very helpful. We've got a few short questions for the panel, and then afterwards, if we can invite you guys listening to submit some. There's a Q&A thing on the edge of the screen, I think, on the right-hand side. You can submit questions. If you want to do it now, rather than just wait till the end, please do so. Otherwise, you know, once we finish this little bit, please do ask some questions then. So if I can start, I mean, we said right at the top that securing access to justice during the pandemic, and particularly during the lockdown, and now again during the lockdown that we're going to go into again, it's very tricky to get help to those who need it. But, and some of you have already shared some good experiences and some positive changes, but are there any you know, changes or important developments or partnerships that any of your good practice, that any of you would want to flag up and share, that have come out of the last 6 months?
Jump in if no one else will, but Ed, did you want to go first? Thanks, Ed. So from my perspective, it's been less working together with other pro bono advisors or clinics, and been more working together in a collaborative approach with things like GPs. So when it comes to employment law in particular, as I said before, my area of expertise, we act for a lot of vulnerable clients. And you're used, if you're an experienced solicitor, to asking the right questions of your clients to decipher how they are struggling, in what ways can you actually help them. It's very specific language that you can pick up, where if you're in a safe space with a client, it's okay to go through. So face-to-face is very useful for that. Yes, you can do it via Zoom or other digital platform, and yes, you can do it by telephone. But I do find that my colleagues who aren't as experienced as me find it difficult to pick up those nuances and the tiny little crumbs that you can glean from a client, where makes you think you shouldn't be speaking to a lawyer, you should be speaking to your GP. Now, as much as the health service is also overwhelmed at this time, and employees that I predominantly help don't like to hear that they should be speaking to a doctor, offer your macho men that don't have much need for that kind of thing, then getting them to go to their GP instead of seeking legal advice and hitting it with a hard hammer that they're used to doing is a bit alien to them. But I have found, not on the legal advice side, but certainly on the collaborative type law, that has been the biggest benefit. I think from our perspective, the hardest thing has been the ability to gauge mental health and to gauge the overall effect on a person without being physically present with them. And obviously nowadays, virtual contact and advice is what is predominantly the default position.
Yeah, Ed, sorry, did you want to come in on that one too?
Jasmine does. No?
Well, just to add, we have seen a lot of collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, and as Nathan has said, it's not always within the legal sector, although we have seen that, but sometimes it's also collaborating with social services, collaborating with schools in some instances. It's really just identifying where there is early intervention and making better use of the relationships that have already been developed with clients on that front. So.
And is there scope to develop those further, to bring on new services or extend the reach to those who perhaps whose needs haven't yet been met?
Definitely,
yeah.
Especially in terms of processing services, where those support services are aware of what we can do to help clients, it has created, a better impact, and therefore there is more room for us as a whole to work well with them.
I think it's quite
something. Oh,
I think it's quite important to distinguish between what we're doing during COVID, when we're making the best of a bad situation, and the technology has been wonderful in achieving things that we couldn't have achieved. And what we see as being the norm, if and when we are past COVID, and I certainly think that we need to say, as lawyers, that telephone justice is poor quality, that video justice is a bit better, but not as good as live justice. And I do feel quite strongly that we need to say that whatever you do, and I do not want to stand in the way of what we do in times of crisis, because a lot has been achieved, even though as there's still a lot of people who are excluded. A lot has been achieved, but that is how we are coping with the current crisis. It is not, to my mind, the way forward. And since there are people high up in the judicial system who think of this as the way forward, I think it is quite important to say that we do not agree.
Ed, sorry, did you want to come in before I just
really briefly add about the kind of holistic things? I mean, it isn't a technological advance, but I think is an advance in our way of working, is that we're a holistic organization. We don't just do pro bono advice, we also do generic advice, we run community services, we do all sorts of things. And we've had a food bank for people with no recourse to public funds based out of our community centre for the whole length of the pandemic. And that has really helped us in terms of gaining trust for people who would not have known they could come to us for legal advice, and them feeling that they were able to do so. And there is something that we have learned there that's really, it's a deep piece of learning for us about being in the places where people get their fundamental needs met. So working out how we, as a pro bono advice centre, make better links with all of the local food banks when we come out of this, and make links with those places, the places where people come, and when they're collecting that bag of food that they need to feed their family, they mention as an aside to a volunteer there another problem that they have, and us having good enough relationships with those volunteers that they understand that that is a legal problem with a legal solution. And I think we've come on leaps and bounds on that in the last few months, and that's a gift that I'm hoping that we can really see differences for real human beings way beyond the pandemic.
Yeah. That's super. That's very positive. Sorry, Nathan.
Yeah, just picking up on what Ed said there, I think that does identify some form of a training need as well, especially for our junior lawyers, that we can pick up on those sensitivities and vulnerabilities in certain clients. So for anyone that does pro bono work, when I started it too many years ago now to mention, you're kind of just thrown into a room and given a list of clients, and that's great, and you can learn on the job, and it's a great experience for young lawyers. But I think in this day and age, especially when you're dealing with a telephone video appointment, then I think a little bit more training than you would normally have about the kind of questions you need to elicit those kind of responses that Ed and Jasmine have both talked about.
Yeah. Great, thank you. The next question really follows on from what Mungo was just saying, slightly looking to the future, whether or not people want to use the fashionable term "building back better" slogan just now. There is clearly, as we've seen, an opportunity to retain some of what we've learnt and discovered or been forced to use during the pandemic to improve the delivery of free legal help. But there will, as Mungo said, be members of the public that can't access online or Zoom, or don't have mobile telephones or credit or whatever. So what's the sort of last 6 months taught us, which over and above what we knew already about the importance of making sure those who are digitally disenfranchised, are not further left behind? Who wants to take that one first?
I think this is a crucial problem, because I don't express any view about Mungo's views about what is the right way that we should do it in the future, but we have to start planning on the basis that we assume that the norm has changed and that there will be more cases conducted in this way in the future, regardless of whether the pandemic still is continuing. So I'm afraid at present, I don't have any potential solution to that problem, I can see what the problem is, but I'd be very interested, as I said, in what how other people think that can be addressed and now going forward.
Ed and Jasmine, I'd be quite interested to hear, your very practical experience with, because I imagine you get a lot of people who this is a very real problem for.
Yeah, so we did a little bit of a straw poll right at the beginning of lockdown and found that 60% of the households that we were working with as a community organisation either didn't have, so we're talking about individuals within households, didn't have access, the person we were talking to didn't have access to a device or the internet. So that's quite a complex thing, because for young people that could be that their parent has a device and they don't, but that's not very helpful to you if you're the person that's seeking advice. And access to the internet was 1 in 3 people didn't have a broadband connection, just couldn't afford one.
Wow.
Hadn't needed one before, which is a lot higher than we were expecting. People were tending to rely on mobile data, which has a cost to it, and they were seeing that their use of that was shooting up because they were used to hopping onto data at cafes and things like that. So that definitely made a difference to people's ability to kind of get online. But actually, there was something else there that we think that we've learned that's kind of missed a trick. So we found ourselves thinking about whether or not people could get online or couldn't get online as the question that we were asking. And we discovered really quickly that there were other questions behind that. So it's not just whether or not you have the physical ability to get online. We now have in our advice centre pods set up so that our advisors are at home and you can talk like this. But that's not very helpful for the people for whom this doesn't work. So a lot of our more vulnerable clients, actually, it's not just about whether or not they can access data. It's about how they get advice that they can use, and actually really building personalized advice services where you realize very early on that someone has, for example, mental health needs, and they might need the help of a psychologically informed environment, which Jasmine will be able to talk about better than me, around them. Or is this somebody with a learning disability where actually we need to ensure that there is somebody with them who can help them take the actions that are needed? I think it's challenged us to think a lot more about holistic advice. And for us, being able to do things easily for people who can access digital advice, that because of the time that saves the people who are volunteering for us and us, if the people who can use it do, what it does is it frees up more time for us to do a much more bespoke service for people who can't access online advice for a myriad of reasons that aren't just about connectivity. I will.
Yeah, no, that's great. Jasmine, did you want to add to that?
Yes, so just to add to that, we have received some training from a volunteer psychotherapist on how to identify when something falls outside of our remit, because we're finding that more and more our advisors were being bogged down with issues that they were simply not trained to deal with, such as mental health and other vulnerabilities. So this is where our collaboration with other support services has been very useful to us, because we're then able to identify someone that knows how to communicate with the client in a way in which they understand, can sometimes have them in the office with them with the relevant PPE and social distancing measures to ensure that the client doesn't lose out. So yes, we do acknowledge that, remote advice and in some cases telephone advice is not going to be suitable for everyone. It has served a lot of our clients well. And as Ed said, where it doesn't work, we are looking at more tailored support services. And I think collaboration is one of the ways forward.
Yeah, great. Nathan, how do you know who you're not reaching, and what's your experience been? And sort of, there's a lot of rural parts of Wales where even if you have got the internet, the reception connectivity might be rubbish. If you want to unmute.
Clicking the wrong button there. Thank you very much. Yes, I think my experience personally has been due to the way that clients connect and the type of clients that connect. So I do find that we get less queries, certainly through the internet inquiry system, than we did previously, pre-pandemic, when it comes to the more vulnerable people that we identify in society. So they reach out in different ways, but also in terms of frontline, you know, at the coalface type advice, I'm relying on other people who do that in different sectors. So I work closely with Shelter Cymru, as I've mentioned previously, but also a few other charities, and I know from them and their experience of the caseworkers on the ground, and I mentioned Merthyr before as one example, of people who are struggling and not able to get there. So they may get a phone call saying, how can I see you? You know, I'm not able to access this information online. I'm not able to download this document and send it to you because I don't have any data, like Ed was saying before. I think from that perspective, we know that a significant number of people are falling through the net and are just not getting the help they need. I think it was you, Mungo, who said at the start this is an intrinsic right, you know, an access to justice right. And unfortunately, as always, when there is a pinch on the purse, the most vulnerable people in society suffer. I am using this week as an opportunity to speak to a lot of people around different parts of the UK and in different clinics to try and answer that exact question. You know, what can we be doing better to identify these people and to help them in ways that they can access themselves?
I don't want to be just the voice of Luddism here, but I do think it's important to look to what the reality is on the ground. The Mental Health Tribunal for Scotland convenes by telephone, and compulsory treatment orders allowing the patient to be detained for 6 months are dealt with by a faceless tribunal, and in relation to a faceless patient, the custodies that are dealt with in the criminal courts remotely from the prisons. It's not unknown by any means for the court to have to use the power to continue all the custodies to the next day because the system has completely failed. So there is quite a long way to go before we have the technology, even for the people who can access it, because if you've got a patient in hospital, then the nurses staff will take him or her to a room and provide a phone, and yet it is on any view an inferior experience. Similarly, the staff in the prison will take the prisoner to the studio and plonk him in front of a camera. But if it doesn't work, then he's still got that extra day before he can appear before the sheriff and ask for bail. And that's where we are in real life.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, does anyone have
such a grump?
Is there a solution to that? What do we do?
More well, if you want to spend, you need to spend more on technology. Technology in the lower courts, certainly in Scotland, is not at a high level of reliability. I think is the first thing. I'm not sure about the mental health tribunals because the idea of accessing them by video is quite problematic as well. No, I don't know what the answer is, but the problems are there, very, very visible, and I'd be astonished if the others don't have similar experiences.
Yes, yes. Before we open us up to the floor, we've said, unfortunately, there are lots and lots of different organisations and people doing fabulous pro bono activities everywhere. But does there come a point where that kind of fractured, disparate nature of the pro bono sector becomes a problem for people finding out about, the services? So how can we make the experience more collaborative and easier for people to find information about, but also easier for the sector to share their skills and experiences as Jasmine and Ed have given some brilliant examples already.
Well, can I be positive for once? As I say, I have been part of the Pro Bono Week committee from Edinburgh. Now, I would never have travelled to London to be a part of that, and the fact that Nathan's here and that Lord Stephen is here is a tribute to the technology, and that technology provides a great opportunity for groups large and small to link together and to provide the connectivity that will benefit the whole pro bono sector.
Lord Stevens, if you unmute yourself.
No, I agree. There is a problem about coordinating all the various groups. Thankfully, Northern Ireland is relatively small, but we still have this effect of people getting shuttled from one place to the next. And the group that I referred to is one of the techniques for doing it. And I know that the Lord Chief Justice is very interested and very concerned that we try and coordinate, as are both of the professions. There is a problem. All we can do is try to make sure that everyone coordinates between each other, and I think it still continues to be a problem. So I'm sorry about that.
Is there a benefit to any of you think about having a sort of single hub? Or in for England and Wales, we used to have Michael Napier as the Attorney General's pro bono envoy or something like that. Is there a value in reinstating that sort of role?
So once again, I would just like to say that LawWorks is doing an amazing job when it comes to that. They have already started discussions around a single point of access for clients. And I know that there are a few initiatives that are designed to bring pro bono advisors together with organizations. So that's something that's worth stating. And there are various events where different organizations are able to get together to discuss the best way to streamline those processes for clients. So that's just something to mention.
Yeah, nobody's knocking the brilliant work that LawWorks does. It was just, we just wanted to canvass some ideas about a more sort of holistic, joined up, and to take the burden off maybe one organization. Nathan, you had your hand up earlier.
Yes, thank you. I was actually going to say exact opposite about taking the burden off one organisation. I would like to see a centralised hub, but for me, it needs to be publicly funded because I think that too much emphasis is placed on the third sector and for people giving up their time themselves, which is a great thing to do in terms of career development. Fantastic to get involved in pro bono work, but we've all spoken about and I hate to be the first person to use the word unprecedented this evening, but we've all spoken about it being unprecedented times and the fact that the need has massively increased in certain key areas. So for me, I would like to see the re-emergence of something like law centres that used to be very prevalent across the UK. But as LawWorks are doing a fantastic job, rather than rebuilding the arc, give the funding to them, in terms of what is actually needed, set up that central hub, have the clinic sat underneath them in a very formal geographical and speciality area. In the question and answers, I'm sure you're going to come to that, Catherine, but in the question and answers, people are talking about legal aid. Yes, that is absolutely needed, and a complete overhaul in the criminal side, at least. There used to be legal aid for certain employment law cases as well. But for me, that's not necessarily the answer. I think there is an element to it, but having that centralized hub, and I'm with Jasmine, I think, and everyone else, it seems, I think LawWorks is doing a tremendous job. So why not? Why not give them the resources they need to make that a proper national centre of excellence as it should be?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see a central system for the very simple reason that I see people getting bounced around. So you come in and you think that you've got a housing issue. So you go to the place that says, that you can get housing advice, but actually it's not a housing issue. It's an issue to do with debt, or it's an issue to do with something else. And so you get pushed to a different advice provider. And often by the time someone comes through our door, they're so angry about the fact that actually they've spoken to 7 different people and they've still not actually had the advice that they need, that the first time we sit down with them, it's just calming them down. And that's no one's fault. The reality is that pretty much every pro bono centre that we know and we work with is underfunded and it's under-resourced, and everybody's running around trying to help people. And actually a centralised place where you go and they make sure that you're sent to the right place, the place that can actually help you. That would be game-changing for people, because besides anything else, for a lot of these people, the case that they entered that first appointment that they got bounced on from is completely different now, because things have moved on, and they could have been helped earlier. And actually the help that they can be given now when they're finally sat in front of the right person it's not as good. Their outcomes are not going to be as good. So yeah, I'd love to see that, but I'm also with Nathan on it needs to be publicly funded and well funded.
Mungo or Lord Stevens, did either of you want to say anything or before we move on? No? Great. Well, there's already some questions coming in. There is a Q&A. I didn't explain it very well, but some people have found it already. There's a Q&A thing on the right-hand side. You just type your questions in. I mean, obviously we can't have this discussion without mentioning legal aid, and there have been a few questions already about that. But I just wondered initially, before I turn to those questions that have come in, how should legal aid and pro bono sort of collaborate, combine, work around one another? And a couple of you now have just mentioned the need for, if there's a single pro bono hub, for that to be publicly funded. Whereas, you know, pro bono by its very nature is meaning there's no money. The stuff is being done because it isn't being funded by anybody else. So where would that money come from for any hub? But more widely than that, how does pro bono and legal aid? I mean, Mungo said, and it's the mantra everyone knows: pro bono is no substitute for a properly funded legal aid system. But how should they work around each other?
Well, I'm hoping that I'll persuade my colleagues in the unit to make us an access to justice unit, so that we will, when we get an application for help, be in a position not just to offer the help of a pro bono advocate, but also perhaps for him or her to prepare an opinion with which to obtain legal aid, or to send that person to get after the event insurance or some other mechanism by which representation or legal advice can be obtained. Because I think that just offering pro bono is rather limiting, and I think there are other ways in which some people can be assisted. And certainly, as I say, people do have difficulty getting a legal aid lawyer for a complex case. But I think if they came with an opinion, a pro bono opinion from counsel, setting out what the case is or might be, then it would be much easier for them to get legal aid to do it. So in that way, I think we can combine pro bono with legal aid and other forms. And I don't think it does to be, frankly, too precious about whether it is pro bono, whether it is a particular mechanism. I think the holistic approach to what best serves the client really is the way forward.
Great, thank you for that. Just looking at one of the questions that's just come in, quite interesting, from Mary Kitson. looking at the delays in the justice system. She asks, if you give pro bono advice initially in a case, but the hearing won't take place until late, 2021, 22 next year, is that a service that vulnerable people actually need? Or, what else should be happening there? Nathan, quick off the mark there.
Thank you. It's only because I happen to be friends with the president of the Employment Tribunal, Barry Clark. So he was our regional employment judge for many years, and I had the pleasure of working with him in the last firm that he worked in, Russell Jones and Walker, as it then was. So when it comes to allocation of hearings in the Employment Tribunal, yes, you are looking at hearings now in late 2021 or even 2022, certainly in Wales and the regions that I act in different parts of the Southwest and some parts of London as well. But you can make applications to the Employment Tribunal, and factors in accelerating hearings for certain vulnerable people are exactly that. So you can say that this needs to be prioritised. And as much as there is a waiting list for everything, and currently it's taken about 10 weeks for them to issue even a claim after you've done it, whereas 6 months ago that would have taken a maximum of a week in most employment tribunal centres, that is actually being taken into account. And it's the discretion of each regional employment judge, but certainly I would advocate people in the employment side of things to write to the tribunal. This is a particularly vulnerable client. These are the mental health issues. And number one, passage of time and therefore memory, so ability to give evidence and recollect things properly, so therefore a fair hearing, but also the disproportionate impact that has on them. So under the Equality Act, there's a public service duty that everyone has, public sector equality duty that everyone has, and that includes the tribunal service. They must provide their advice in a way that does not disproportionately impact one of the protected characteristics, which disability is one. So when you're looking at a vulnerable person, generally there will be a very low threshold Section 6 disability under the Equality Act that you can point to.
There's a question asking about legal aid in the Employment Tribunal and whether it should be restored. And that, in a sense, is exactly the point that I was sort of thinking. Because pro bono is there, the fact that there is no longer legal aid means that there is no sort of comeback or no impetus to push a government of whatever stripe to reinstate legal aid because for the employment work, because there are people willing to represent people before those tribunals for nothing. Is the solution there to reinstate legal aid? And further, are there some areas that pro bono shouldn't touch on, because that is really ought to be the remit for government to fund representation in a proper manner? Ed, you're laughing. Do you want to say something on that?
I just love that question because I just think that's absolutely. I love that we have tens and tens of people, professional people, who are giving their time for free to help people who need it. Should they have to? No, of course they shouldn't. Their altruism could be used in so many different ways, and while we need them, they'll continue to do that. But actually, yeah, I'd love to see a fully funded legal aid service. I think probably everyone would. I don't see that in our future, though. I think that's the thing. That's not when Jasmine and I think about what we want to do with a service. It's not something that we go, but what if this happens? It's just, it doesn't feel on the cards. I could be wrong.
Nathan.
I'm back in again. So from my perspective, obviously the Employment Tribunal legal aid, you have a chicken and egg scenario where when it was pulled, law centres had to pick up the mess, and then volunteer lawyers were roused by their own law firms to actually provide that assistance. And there's been a lot of good promotion about that to make sure these things happened. But from my opinion, not being someone who practices in other areas of law, I would say criminal law is one where it cannot be supported pro bono. These are far too important issues. So if you take what I think are the most important ones in society, having a job, having a home over, a roof over your head, you know, in terms of a home, having access to your children if there's a family law dispute, things like that. Criminal has to come top, in my opinion, because that's someone's liberty. You know, having good representation or not means if someone is unfairly convicted and is locked up behind bars. So as much as the other ones, and certainly my area of law, has a massive effect on people in terms of their day-to-day life, I can't think of anything worse than being locked up as part of an injustice. So legal aid has to be properly reinstated in the criminal courts.
Yeah. Mungo, perspective from Scotland.
I think probably legal aid is constrained by the European Convention, and I think that probably the government will not extend legal aid further than the Convention requires. And I think it does require it in relation to criminal matters, and probably doesn't in relation to employment matters, but I am interested in the Section 4 tribunals that sit in London and deal remotely with people from all over the United Kingdom, who are people who are failed asylum seekers who are facing eviction, and they have a tribunal all of their own in relation to which there is no legal aid and no face-to-face hearings. And given what's at stake for those people, I think there is a convention problem in there being no legal aid. For other people who have lost their jobs and are now seeking compensation, that is a much more problematic issue in terms of the European Convention, and I think Ed's probably wise to keep it off her agenda with Jasmine when they're making up their wish list.
Great. Lord Stevens, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you that question. Another question from Fatima Mumtaz. Oh, sorry, that's not the one I was going to ask. My thing has just moved. This was about the demand for pro bono work. You know, increased volunteering, they say, is 100% desirable, but cannot be a panacea to the huge increase in demand. So what else can be done by the legal community as a response? Jasmine, I don't know why I'm drawn to you for this one.
Sure. I think we have to seek other ways of getting important information out there, ways that have huge impacts. So one of the things that we've learned from organizations like Law for Life is how to create resources in a way that clients can engage with. That one resource that is prepared by one volunteer, for instance, can reach many people. And often when they're able to go through them before they attend appointments, they are better prepared for their appointments. So the time used with them and their legal advisor is, you know, is better used. They're able to get more out of it, sometimes even have documents drafted. So that's something that I think can be quite useful.
Great. Just anxious, want to just get a few more questions in. Somebody asks, during the current times, what would each of the panel ask law firms or chambers to do to make pro bono more effective? Very practical question there.
I think that there should be some, well, law firms use pro bono as a tool and to develop their own staff, to get recognition in the wider community. And I think that courts can do a lot more about that, insofar as they can recognize people who give of their own time in a somewhat more formal way. I think the professions can perhaps do it as well by by expecting people to have as part of their CVs pro bono work and to encourage people who perhaps apply for judicial appointment to demonstrate that they have given of their time in the past. So those are small cultural changes that can support pro bono work.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I completely agree, Lord Stevens. And for me, there's much more practical things that law firms can do as well. I'm not going to wax lyrical about the pro bono targets that we've set up, but I would love to see more law firms do it. I'd love to see more law firms giving back. And we're not just talking about lawyers. We're not just talking about qualified solicitors and barristers. There's a whole plethora of help that you can give vulnerable clients. That sometimes it's just reading a letter for them and explaining it to them in plain English. That doesn't need to be a qualified solicitor. So for me, it's about identifying what each person can do. Think of all the corporate finance solicitors in the UK. You know, maybe they think they can't do any pro bono advice because what kind of person can't afford to pay for corporate finance advice? Not the kind of client I want. Well, funny enough, that's where pro bono advice comes in. Go to your local law centre and help someone with debt advice. You know, go to them and let them, you know, work through a sheet with them about what their incomings and outgoings are. You don't need to have even a law degree to do that kind of thing, I think. And for people who do have a law degree but aren't qualified solicitors, I would advocate quite significantly that they gain that experience in pro bono advice centres. There's a lot of back office kind of work that's needed as well. Jasmine already mentioned about one volunteer, and I'm thinking of video platforms, doing a whole raft of them. University of South Wales has done some excellent ones in the Employment Tribunal, where people from different disciplines got together. So some law students got together, some marketing people got together, and some, I'm going to call them tech, so I have no idea what department it was. IT of some sort. I'm sure my age now, but from that perspective, they were able to produce these beautiful videos of cartoon characters going through the Employment Tribunal system, showing an individual what it looks like and not to be scared of it effectively. So those kind of things can be utilised everywhere in law firms. You know, don't just think about a solicitor ticking a CSR box. You need to get out of that mentality in law firms, I think.
Great. Perhaps to end with a positive question, Martha De La Roche asks, can any of the panel talk about the successes and or potential opportunities for pro bono posed by the pandemic response and remote working and service delivery? I don't know if she means for volunteers, you know, things that people can do. Any ideas, I suppose, for people looking to get involved? No.
At a really basic level, if people are looking to get involved because they want to help out and advise, then myself and Jasmine will be hanging around at the end, and we are always looking for more people. But on a yeah, I mean, that's just a really, like, please do, if you really want to talk to someone about where you can get advice, Jasmine, I would be delighted to offer you that opportunity to be advising vulnerable people. Yeah, but I think also, yeah, the other opportunity is really think about and talk to your law firm about public legal education and about what you can do to support people to know what their rights are before they get into trouble, because I think that's something that we really, really need to build some learning around.
Yeah.
Just to quickly add to that, I would just say remote advice has meant that there is more flexibility in the way in which advice is delivered. So if there are any volunteers looking to help out, then remote advice allows you to do that with some ease. You can do that in between other commitments, which we've seen with some of our existing volunteers. And, you know, it's just created a more connected community for that. So if you find an organization that will be able to host you, then by all means do get in touch.
Great. Yes, Nathan.
It's about turning perceived threats into opportunities as well. So people spending more time working from home and not having the daily commute means you would hope that they would have more time to actually help out. So for me, you know, don't become a Netflix junkie. Instead, actually try to give some time to helping other people. We talked a little bit, and I appreciate it's not the focus of this evening, but the benefits of giving pro bono advice can't be underestimated. The feel-good factor as it starts just escalates. And for me, it's been a tremendous support in my legal career. I wouldn't have had exposure to some of the cases that I didn't, certainly younger in my career, if I didn't do pro bono advice. And they're the cases that stay with you as well. So if anyone is thinking about it, certainly there is every advantage to doing it. And also with people working from home, not feeling connected to others and feeling that they're struggling themselves for mental health, what more of a boost do you need than helping someone who was worse off than you through something which a little bit of time that you can give can really help them exponentially in their lives. So helps you, it helps them. Think about what you're doing, think about how you're spending your time, and just put yourself out there.
Yeah, great. There's quite a practical question that's come in, asking how people are dealing with the dangers and data concerns from virtual meetings. Is there any practical information or things that you've learned, or how to allay people's fears, perhaps, on that one, that any of you can share?
Well, I don't know if it's helpful, but we have created a guide for remote advice, which does advise our volunteers to look out for certain things. For instance, to let clients know to be in private places when they're having these discussions. We also have access to a good CRM, which means that advisors are able to upload their notes immediately, and we don't have to send notes over via email. They can actually log on to the CRM and access the client's details. So I think a combination of good guides, good systems will really help in that regard.
Just moving on from that, again, another sort of practical question here. Is there an element that, aside from training the volunteers, do the clients themselves need training in how to work remotely and get the most out of those meetings? I don't know if anyone is doing that, sort of training the client, and if any of you are, can you tell us how?
Well, obviously I'm not, but obviously there are huge difficulties about training the type of people we've been talking about today, and that is just an impossible task. And so it's a question of providing assistance to them. There'll be other people who can be trained, who can learn, but there's huge numbers of people that most certainly can't be trained. And that is the problem, because I'm not certain we're going to be reverting totally to what we were before. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is another matter. And I can see pressures on the system to keep remote access to courts. And if you have that pressure, the courts will then be saying, if we don't go to an IT solution for everyone, then you will not have, people will just continue on with a paper solution in the future. So I think it's a major problem, and We have to, and I think that there's a large section of the community that we just cannot educate to use IT, and we'll have to address that. I think I'm not certain that I can go much further because I don't want to trespass on what is the responsibility of government as opposed to the legal service.
Ed and Jasmine or Nathan, have you got any experience of that?
Doing a little bit of training around digital skills with people using our community services. We worked with some students from Queen Mary's University to develop a program to kind of help people to digital buddying so people can understand how to access things online. The challenge for us is with the people who want to use our pro bono advice services is that they don't want to be trained in digital, they just want to be advised. And to say to someone when they're coming to you with an issue that's core to their life, well, yeah, I can help you with that, but first I want to train you on how to use Zoom, and first I want to train you on how to present yourself online, is that they don't want that, and actually it feels quite an insulting thing to offer, and that's where our real barrier is how do you offer that to someone in a way that they'll take it? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. No, that's quite right. That there are enough barriers.
I was interested to see the comment by Martha de la Roche about the Digital Unite doing a lot of training to support vulnerable users, and which I didn't know about. So
I suspect the answer may be the phone, because although there are lots of people who don't have computers, and there are increasingly fewer people who don't have phones, and while phoning in is unsatisfactory compared with either being there in person or being online, it is something that a huge percentage of the community does have. It's something like 99% of people have a mobile phone. So, and of the 1%, many of them will be the very elderly rather than the very underprivileged. So basically, everyone has a phone now. It's not good, but it is there, and I think that if you want to reach those people who are too underprivileged to work the Zoom, the kind of person that Ed was just mentioning, then I think you will have just to accept that he or she will only be phoning in, and of course, increasingly people's phones have cameras, and so they may be persuaded into some form of video conferencing through that mechanism.
Thank you. Great. I see Toby has joined us, so I guess that's a cue to wrap up there. But thank you all ever so much.
To jump in, but that was a really fantastic discussion. So on behalf of the audience, and I'm afraid we can't even do a Zoom thumbs up or clap your hands because this doesn't allow it, but I'm sure the audience would want me to thank all of you for giving your time up tonight, for all of our panelists, and for Catherine for chairing it so well. I think there are a number of takeaways for all of us in the audience, and just to summarize a few points that sort of I'd like to, for myself, remember. I mean, the first is about the problems that we're all aware of in these last months of the pandemic, the increases that we've seen in demand for particularly housing, education, employment and debt advice. I think we all know about. I think what's been particularly interesting for me is to hear about all the difficulties of accessing that sort of help online. The straw poll that Toynbee Hall did about how some of their users, in fact, were not able to access the sort of obvious online resources that all of us here tonight can do so easily. But then moving to some of the solutions we've heard about, it was particularly interesting to hear about how technology has played a role, but actually you still need those partnerships on the ground. You need to be able to have people in the food bank that are trusted by the clients to then signpost to where that help can be got. When we think about the future, moving to the future, I think we had some provocative suggestions of what we could do, but the idea of a central hub made a lot of sense to me. Can we get that publicly funded? Could LawWorks take on that role? Question mark. I know we've got Martin Barnes from LawWorks in the audience. Looking to Scotland, could Scottish advocates give pro bono opinions to help clients get legal aid? We have many possible solutions, and I think the questions from the audience were particularly instructive. So with that sort of very brief attempt to give a brief summary, can I again thank the panel, and can I also encourage all of you to rejoin the networking, which Mary will activate in a second, and do continue these discussions in your little tables. So thank you very much, everyone, and do enjoy the rest of Pro Bono Week.